Hello, I'm Rosemary Hannah. Welcome to the series, The Bahamas Then and Now, that deals with our history, heritage, arts and culture, and all those things that make us uniquely Bahamian. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. With us today is musician Fred Ferguson. Welcome to the show, Fred. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us first of all, Fred, about your childhood, where you were born, and the influences in your life.
Well, I was born in Chester's, Acklands, all the way in the southern part of the Bahamas. My parents both were teachers. I grew up between Acklands and Crooked Island. I always jokingly tell people that I speak with that, I travel most of the islands in the Bahamas. So when we have school reunions, I have so many friends from everywhere. But I spent my early years on those two islands. My father got promoted. We moved to Nassau. We moved to Long Island. We moved to Eleuthera. Graduated school twice, and then moved to Nassau. So the influence that everything that makes me what I am today is a whole mixture of all of those islands put together.
What were the things that were taught to you as a child and the influences that were instilled in you and children of your age?
Well, I grew up the old-fashioned way. They didn't spare the rod with me because I was the firstborn, so I had to set the example for everybody else. But education was important. The whole spirituality, religion thing was very important also. Sundays were put aside for church. Neighborhood, being neighbors was a very important thing. Growing up in those parts of the islands, especially Acklands and Crooked Island, we didn't have much of anything. So we shared, we played in the yard, we shot marbles, we flew kites, and I went fishing sometimes with my granddaddy, and also all of those old-fashioned things that we read about. I had a piece of all of those.
So having moved, to so many of the different family islands, what were the differences that you found in
One thing for sure,
places?
The culture is different, and this is one thing that makes the Bahamas so unique, is everything about each of those islands is so uniquely different. The dialect between settlements, for example, firstly, and then the dialects between islands. Chester's Acklands and Lovely Bay and Mason's Bay Acklands, are three different dialects. True Blue Crooked Island and Colonel Hill and Cabbage Hill, that's a different dialect. You go to Long Island, Deadman's Key and Mangrove Bush, dialect difference. Governor's Harbor and Palmetto Point next door to each other. Harbor Island, different dialects. So all of these things that we have that I think we take for granted, we don't take the chance to celebrate and to even learn what makes all these islands so different. I'm not even talking about the food and the cuisine and the flora and fauna. All of these things add up to make everything so uniquely different.
You really had a diverse education, and that's unique. Very unique, and I'm sure you've benefited much from that.
Without question. I ain't as smart as I should be going to all of these schools, but I could remember all of the good times for sure.
That's excellent.
Even though we didn't have all the technology, and maybe that also added to my growth as a musician, because I grew up in Acklands where we didn't have any electronic instruments. The churches had pump organs. We pumped those two pedals. And the churches that didn't have those, we just sang. And everybody in the community sang from the hymn book and the Union Tune book and shape notes. So if you listen to all the work that I produced, you will still hear a sense of that regular 4-part harmony that I would have heard growing up.
4-part harmony is so beautiful.
It's the best thing in the world.
So when did you decide that you were going to become a musician?
I didn't decide it. It decided for me. I was always around music, as I was mentioning about the family islands and the churches. I taught myself everything that I do. I've never been to music school. So the story I'm told by my parents is my father had a 1-string mandolin, I think, in the house, and I took interest in that. Then that eventually developed to the 6-string guitar. I did a little organ lesson with a lady in Crooked Island. I played organ in church for a while. But through the years, back then you couldn't be a you couldn't do music as a job.
No.
You know, my parents
get a regular job.
Get a job, and so they didn't approve of me being a musician. But even during high school and after high school, I worked at Batelco, I worked at Barclays Bank. I took my guitar to work on my lunch hours. I played, and so I always wanted to do this thing. One morning I woke up while working at the bank and I didn't go back to work. I just said I'm not doing it anymore. So I didn't resign. So I may still be on their payroll now, for all that I know. But I just quit. I joined the band High Voltage, which became Bahamian, and the rest is history.
So what other groups were you affiliated with?
I just took the opportunity, well, in the islands. First, when I was in Long Island, I played with some bands there locally while in high school. And when we moved to Eleuthera, I played with a gospel group called the Gospel Heralds. I played with Charlie Cooper. And when I came to Nassau, I joined the Love Singers. And from the Love, I can't think who I didn't play with. I just went with everybody, the Backstabbers and so forth and so on.
Quite a versatile musician you are.
Thank you.
I know that you are very much concerned about the plight of musicians in the Bahamas and their ability to make a living in their country. Let's speak to that.
All those years I talked about going between all these bands and those names that I called. That was during a time, I came into Nassau from Eleuthera during a time when entertainment was almost at its highest. I don't know anything about the Cat and Fiddle, and I heard about those, and I heard they were good years too. But I came in when Balmoral Beach, which is now Breeze's Sandals, to Ambassador Beach, which is now Breeze's, had entertainment on that entire strip. I started out in the back room. Bands were everywhere, and that's not even mentioning Paradise Island at that time, or Over the Hill with the Conch Shell and all those other places. So there was a chance to develop being a musician. Nowadays, we have nothing. There's nothing for young persons who want to be musicians to aspire to, and it has deteriorated so much now that we are competing with military bands who have now put together pop bands and taking away more work from persons who are wanting to be musicians. So the challenge is great. The support is none from the government. We don't have an active Bahamas Musicians and Entertainers Union. There's nothing really positive I can say about what's happening in the industry today.
I think that's very, very sad, because I can remember when I was a young woman, and there were bands, even before you came to Nassau, bands at every little nook and cranny in New Providence had a live band. And I visited a lot of those places, and it was such great fun.
Yep.
And those musicians were accomplished.
That is right. We have
accomplished musicians.
We're a talented little nation. I mean, we see it, the number of athletes we send away, the musicians, Bahamian and others we have seen went around the world and represented us. So we know that we can do it. With support, with guidance, we can change the world almost. The challenge we have is the support is none. And the standards have dropped so low that we're now sending away people to represent the Bahamas who think they are at the standard. But we don't have the body that polices who we send away. The B3As is the body for the athletes. We don't have a body that represents the entertainers, and so the standards have dropped.
We're always talking about Bahamian music and all that, but when you listen to some of the things on the radio that you hear, they're really not up to par. A lot of it is not up to par.
Not at all.
But we do have excellent musicians here. I know you're also concerned about what we call Bahamian music.
That's a challenge.
Let's talk about that.
That's a big challenge, because 40 whatever years we're in independence, we have not decided what that is yet. We have not said, someone like me talk about rake and scrape all the time. I believe that it should be on national dance music, even though we have Junkanoo, which could be determined on national festival music, because we dance the two of them differently. When you dance to Burma Road, you skull.
Yes.
When you dance to Get Involved or dance with the Junkanoo, you do that two-step thing. So I don't think we should minimize any of them. We should celebrate the fact that we have them. We also have that rhyming spiritual thing that we do. And we have Spence, who does Joseph Spence, who does the folk thing. So we have all of these things that we can call our own, but we are afraid as a nation to say it. So when I sit across the table from someone from Trinidad and they say, "What's your music?" I should be able to rightly say, documented, the music of the Bahamas is this. As it's documented, the national sports, I think it's cricket still, or sloop sailing.
Supposedly.
I still don't know.
I think it's a good thing that what Nat Adams Jr. is doing with the rake and scrape? The rake and scrape with those young men. And
yeah, I think you're right.
So to bring that back, it's excellent.
We just got to be careful, though. We got to be careful because I appreciate the effort that he is doing, but I don't think we have done enough research to understand that rake and scrape is a specific cadence. You can't play a Junkanoo rhythm with a saw and call it rake and scrape. No. You can't put a cowbell in a reggae song and call it Junkanoo. No. There are specific cadences that determine each one. So even though I applaud what Nat is doing, I think talking to Bohog and Ophi and those guys from Cat Island, rake and scrape have these 7 moves, the quadrille, the heel and toe, and all of those are separate rhythms. So I think we need to find a way to ensure that Nat and those other persons teaching what is supposed to be rake and scrape
it's authentic.
Understand what the authentic thing is.
Yes.
But there's a gentleman that came to the Bahamas. He's an ethnomusicologist from Philadelphia. His name is Tim Rumman. He actually came, met with Ed Moxie, met with Bohog, met with Ronnie Butler. He just did a full research and wrote a book called Funky Nassau, where he broke down all of these different rhythms. Chris Justillion did the same thing for his master's thesis.
I've seen that.
And so the work has been done. It just seems to me that we are afraid to implement these things that have been established already. Is like something has happened over the years. I don't know if it's in the air or whatever, that we're just ashamed to recognize and say who we are, what makes us Bahamian and makes us different from everybody
and to really appreciate ourselves.
There's so much. I think we need to start celebrating the positives of what's happening in this country. We have too many young people doing great things that we don't recognize. And I keep saying every year, I think our independence celebration that we do at Clifford Park now should speak and celebrate everything positive that happened from last independence to now. So we should know who the spelling bee winner is. We should know who the National Arts Festival went, who won the National Regatta. All these things we're spending money for.
Yes.
Why is it that we're not celebrating the Bahamas All-Stars? You know, my eldest son, Byron, is the only Bahamian that plays professional volleyball. We don't know. He's in Indonesia playing. We have other young people playing basketball.
And then there's Ty.
Ty is also doing great in New Mexico. So we have the young people who should be showcased, so a young kid in Ragged Island could say next year, that could be me. Because if they're doing it, I know I can do that too, but we have to somehow get pointed in that direction, and we do not have the leadership in place now to do that. That's
rather unfortunate. We have to take a break now, Fred, but when we get back, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.
You're watching the Bahamas Then and Now. This episode is brought to you by the Private Trust Corporation Limited, Dungalik Studios, and Vodio.
This is the Bahamas. 700 islands, reefs, and keys, sporting a distinct history and heritage all its own. This is New Providence, most populated, industrialized island at the center of the archipelago. Home of Nassau, the capital city, seat of Parliament, location of political and social revolution, site from which our nation declared its independence. And this is Over the Hill, a community, a series of neighborhoods in what was then considered Southwest New Providence. Settled by slaves, having served as the midwife of national deliverance. Over the Hill, a breeding ground of nation builders, constructing trait by trait, precept upon precept, character-toting, culture-shaping leaders. Over the hill, where independence was born, where the naval string of Bahamianization is buried, where Junkanoo got polished. Over the hill, where sense and sensitivity were kneaded into the dough of children's souls, where people reverently genuflected to the image of God in every man. Over the hill. East Street, Market Street, Blue Hill Road, Baintown, Grantstown, Anderson Street, Augusta Street, DeFort Hill, McPherson Street, Over the Hill, McCullough Corner, Hay Street, Glinton Square, where? Mason's Addition, Jail Alley, Lewis Street, Over the Hill. The Coakleys, the Smiths, the Johnsons, the Blydens, the DeStoops, the Grants and the Coopers, the McPhersons and the Pindlings, the Allens and the Winders, Over the Hill, the Hannahs, the Bostricks, the Burnsides, the Bethels, the Walkers, the Enuses and the Thompsons, the McCartneys and the Gibsons, Over the Hill. What if we went back and dug into the soil of our glorious past? And what if we studied the roots and found the patterns of Bahamian unity and success and progress and superimposed those on the social ills of Lil Nassau, the social ills of the Bahamas in general? What would happen? What would happen if we really understood where we came from? Our heritage is not ghetto. Our language is not profanity. Our resolution is not violence. We are Bahamians, kings and queens, gentlemen and ladies, athletes and warriors in every sphere, geniuses and priests, artists and leaders, and much of it started over the hill.
You're watching the Bahamas Then and Now.
Welcome back. Our guest today is Fred Ferguson. Before the break, Fred, we were talking about the different genres of music. Can you explain a little more about that?
It's a musical thing that we could easily do by notation, but like I said, we just have to look at the way we dance to these rhythms. And if you want some examples, I make reference to the quintessential rake and scrape pop song to me is Burma Road. Ronnie Butler took a chance and fused the traditional sounds of rake and scrape and made it modern for whatever year that was he released that. He has all of us who are musicians and producers now trying to recreate that whole rhythm. So that rake and scrape sense of rhythm that, we know what the saw does and what the goatskin drum does versus what Dr. Off would have done with Get Involved, or what Bahamian would have done with Dance to the Junkanoo and Marmalade and those things. And just play the two of them and just watch how we react. We scull. We scull to that thing, and you look on Bay Street, you watch the way the young people dance to the Junkanoo. There's a two-stepper kind of, it's more like a march. Each of those things give different feelings and different responses.
I know when I was working in banking, the first time I heard about Joseph Spence was, would you believe it, from my American boss.
Interesting.
And also, that was the first time I heard about Amos Ferguson, because the bank was buying Bahamian art at the time. Tell me about how Joseph Spence influenced your playing.
Growing up in Acklands and Crooked Island, as I said earlier, we did not have television. We only had AM radio, and ZNS 1540 was all that we had, other than the now and then we'll hear some international radio. But Z&S was at that time playing stuff like Ferguson's A Farm Road, which is our main entertainment once a week, or soap opera. But Mr. Carter, Charles Carter, on his Young Bahamian show really influenced me a lot, because he went around the islands and found out all these talented people that we had. And I heard Joseph Spence music through that station. Now, again, understanding my 4-part harmony, crown and harmony, harmony heaven upbringing, Spence played a lot of that music. But to hear what he was doing with the guitar, just him alone, just stood out with me, and I can't explain why. I've never seen him, I never met him. I study him quite a bit. I still struggle to try to play what he did. But I bought, just like you, I learned more about him in Japan. I bought my first Spence CDs in Japan.
Amazing.
And it's just sad that as a nation still, we have done nothing to recognize him. He died as a security officer at Oaksfield Primary. Here's a guitar player that's world renowned. I just got an email yesterday with a Japanese person transcribing a song that Spence played, because he wanted to see if I approved what he did. We just failed.
We just don't appreciate our own, which is very, very sad.
We have failed.
You know, some people have the misconception that Junkanoo is the sum total of our culture. Well, how do you feel about that?
When I talk about Junkanoo, I have to like walk in the road and look over my shoulder, because I always annoy the Junkanooers. I am truthfully, I think, one of the biggest fans of what Junkanoo is supposed to be, not what it is today. We have removed the historic celebratory value of Junkanoo. Junkanoo is supposed to be, as far as I'm told, and until I'm told differently, I'm going to have to take it this way, it's a celebration that the slaves were able to celebrate on Bay Street, but also in Nagua, it's just as Bahamian as New Providence. So if it's a national event, I'm imagining that Inagua should feel the same energy, and it should be celebration. But we have brought this entire thing down to
a competition.
Two groups, a competition between two groups, Saxons and Valley, and it's like bragging rights all year long and betting behind the scenes and all this stuff that goes on. So everybody else who come onto Bay Street is like the cheerleaders, you know, it is taking them space. But we have diminished the pasting, we have diminished the rhythms, because right now the Goatskin drum is playing some kind of hip hop thing. It's grown into a glorified marching band, because all of the horns and girls dancing in the front. And it's just in that little arena that we have created in Shirley Street and Bay Street. So Junkanoo has such great potential to reach the world as a different festival. But we made the mistake and created this carnival thing, and that's another discussion. But Junkanoo has such energy and such diversity that if we take the chance, again, to research it, I think that Junkanoo can be the carnival or the festival of this region.
What do you think about the introduction of brass to Junkanoo?
Again, when I came to Nassau, Junkanoo didn't have that. It had basically bugles. But you could close your eyes on Bay Street and know the difference between the Valley beat and the Saxons beat. Because the Valley had this slapping cowbell kind of thing. The Saxons was known for the rolling drums. Now, all are the same. Brass, playing foreign songs. We have created a song competition to get songs for Carnival, but we have not done a song competition to get people to play Bahamian songs on Bay Street. So it's going to be a competition of who has the loudest brass, who plays the most popular American or reggae song, try to squeeze into a Junkanoo rhythm. And so even though brass, I think, can bring some level of innovation to it, we also got to be very careful, because the moment you add chromatic instruments to Junkanoo, the judging becomes different.
Yes.
Because you have to start thinking now harmony and melody and counterpoint, and we don't do that. We have the worst harmonies on Bay Street.
And then too, my ears become very disturbed when I hear out-of-tune brass instruments.
Absolutely.
And sometimes you have hundreds of instruments and they all out of tune.
You see, the moment a young child could spit in their horn, you turn them loose to Bay Street. And so when you go to the other Caribbean countries that have Carnival, you graduate to play the steel pan in their presentation to the world. We keep forgetting that this is a new age. Everything is digital. It's on YouTube, and you're sending this to the Bahamas, showing lots of people celebrating mediocrity. And that cannot bode well for
I
us.
think we too often send off mediocrity to represent the Bahamas.
Sake.
That is very distressing.
I don't even talk about it. When I see that group on the step of the White House,
oh, that is very distressing.
It can make me sad now.
You know, we have a lot of very good school bands now. And what are the good things that are happening as far as music is concerned in the Bahamas?
Well, teachers like Yanel Justillion, who's in charge of the Bahamas All-Star Band, his brother Chris, and some others, Zenobia Pear, and there are some others around town that are doing some really good work with some young people. Apart from getting them scholarships to go away to school, but developing really more horn players than anything else. We don't have any guitar players coming out of that crew, not very many. But I can see the makings of some new talent coming into the industry, even though we know we don't have any offshoots for them, where they're going to go when they finish those groups. But at least we're teaching them the fundamentals of music. Some of the school bands are horrible too. I mean, let's not overlook that. It's also the same, and most of these kids in these bands, the only thing to aspire to is Junkanoo on Bay Street. Mr. Justillion, both Justillions, they have really brought their talent to train lots of young musicians. And the only thing I fear, though, is a lot of those are not even qualified to play in a band like my band, because their whole thing is playing pretty much in one key and playing songs for Junkanoo and so forth. So even a few of them, yes, they moved on, but a lot of them don't have the outlets, like I said, to improve upon what they learned with these gentlemen. So yeah, we have some good stuff.
I know that at CV Bethel we also have Giovanni Clark. I think he's doing a wonderful job with the band down there.
Yeah, yes, that's right.
Very good. All these young people are getting this training now. What do they aspire to in the Bahamas?
Firstly, I think we need someone in the leadership position who has a passion for the arts across the board, not just music, just for the arts generally. Because I can remember the Dundas used to have a season.
Yes.
They had their own awards, the Danza Awards.
That's right.
That was a big thing. We had the Timothy Awards for musicians. And so it's not that we didn't have these things. Somehow we just let our bicycle fetch until the wheels stop turning, and they don't happen anymore. It isn't hard to get back to it. It just needs some direction and focus. We have not had a minister in the government whose passion was really the arts. We had ministers who really focused on Junkanoo. No one who really worked with people on the ground like myself and Philip Burrows and others to say how we could make this thing happen. So I really hope that, that it comes to that one day, that we'd wake up and understand that no society survives without the arts. We need to understand that if this country gets to its lowest point, the only thing that's going to take us out is our culture, the arts, and everything that's unique that makes us Bahamian.
So how do we go about instilling this sort of self-pride and national pride in our people, because we've lost so much?
It takes a whole, like I said earlier, sense of leadership. Someone has to step up, who speaks out to the public. I mean, there are persons like myself who speak, but we don't have the authority like the ministers or the directors and so forth. Someone needs to step out and say, you know what, we're going to make this happen. I mean, they establish a body, like Barbados has their national cultural department, whatever they call that. We need to establish something like that that's autonomous, that's funded from some of these companies that's coming into the Bahamas, to ensure that there are after-school programs, that there's work for these young people who want to be musicians. Because we're creating all music teachers now. They're coming out of COB, they're going back into school just being music teachers. So that circle is right here. So we need to find that, we need to have that one person who's bold enough to take the chance to understand how important this thing is to our survival and put it into action, and we'll see a whole different nation.
Well, Fred, this has been very, very enlightening. I'm sorry the time has been so short.
No problem. I appreciate you having me here.
It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you for watching the Bahamas Then and Now. We invite you to continue watching this series, and we urge you to invite others to do the same. Thank you so much for being with us, Fred.
You're very welcome, ma'am.